Okay, perfect. So hi everyone, and thanks a lot for joining today's webinar with our pricing app partner Beyond Pricing. So thanks a lot, Jake, for the presentation that you are willing to do today to give us some insights about, especially about the current situation and how it impacts our industry, and what are the recommendations that you guys at Beyond Pricing would like to share with us to be able to face the crisis and also to prepare the future. Just for the participants to know, so the webinar will be in English, but Ben from the Beyond Pricing team, he's a French member of the sales team at Beyond Pricing. He is also participating to the webinar today. So I would suggest you that you ask the question in the chat that is available in the Zoom meeting. In English or in French, as you want, and he will be able to get back to you after the webinar to answer the questions in French, and also to schedule a demo in French if you want. But yeah, the webinar will be in English for today. So Jake, if you want to start with the presentation, please go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Audrey, and thanks everyone who's dialed in for the webinar today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jake Gingrich, and I'm a team lead in Europe, where I focus all of my effort in helping property managers capitalize on opportunities to increase their revenue using our revenue management software. As we all know, like travel trends are changing daily as the world navigates through the COVID-19 crisis, especially the vacation rental industry. Before we get started, just wanted to say that we understand how challenging the times are for everyone. We don't have a magic bullet that's going to turn things around today, but we are here for you and want to be the best resource we can for you today and help you build the strongest business possible as we pull out of this together. We've been monitoring markets impacted by COVID-19 since January, and have been focusing on key indicators that have helped identify important trends ahead of time. We're directly connected to over 240,000 properties around the globe. So the data we're reviewing today is real data from real property managers. While there is still quite a bit of uncertainty regarding when markets will begin to recover, we wanted to share which metrics we've been using to monitor markets, which you can also use to keep an eye out for when your markets start to recover. As far as an agenda, basically 4 main parts. The first is latest cancellations and booking trends, where we will be looking at how the initial fallout affected bookings in different countries, and then also markets within those countries, and how that data helps influence our decisions and predictions. Pricing strategies, I'll talk about how specific settings and customizations you can use within Beyond Pricing if you are a user of our software to help drive for occupancy in the short and medium term. Followed by revenue management in the era of COVID-19, where we'll talk about how the role of revenue manager is changing in this crisis and what revenue managers can be doing with their time to put themselves in the best position to recover. And then we'll finish up with the Q&A. I think the plan is Audrey's going to open up the mic for everyone, so feel free to chime in then with any questions that you have, enter them into the chat, and we'll get those answered at the end of the webinar. All right, first thing up is cancellations and booking trends. So this first graph is displaying the percentage of cancellations made on the y-axis for bookings made with check-in dates on the x-axis. So there's about 8 different lines on the screen. We'll kind of go into each line specifically in a second, but we're basically breaking down how cancellations came in really around the start of March for most markets and began to peak in mid-March. This is a metric we are analyzing across all of our markets. It can give us insight into how far out guests are uncertain about their ability to fulfill their current reservations. For most of Europe, we saw cancellations start to pick up at the beginning of March and start to peak the first week of April. And we will likely see another round of cancellations for most countries as shelter-in-place restrictions are extending further into May and June. But we can see like this yellow line is Italy, where we saw that spike of COVID cases come a little bit before the rest of Europe. So we see their cancellations start to spike in mid-February, followed by Spain, the orange line, and in France, the blue line, begin to spike that first week of March, and followed up shortly after with the UK, the week of March 16th. So everyone has kind of gone through the same thing in terms of cancellations, right? A sudden sharp increase directly correlated with lockdowns and the decrease of guest sentiment and their ability to stay there. Looking out into the future, relatively people are holding on to reservations in the summer for now. We are seeing people cancel bookings farther out into the future in places like Italy and Spain, where there's a little less confidence that people will be able to fill those bookings into the future. But in the UK, in the US, we're seeing people hold on to those bookings a little bit longer out into the summertime. It's important for us to watch this graph over time to see if the lines keep driving downward or if they start to flatten out. And what I mean by that is, if we go and check this same graph 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks after that, will we still see kind of like this spike here in mid-March, first week of April, or will we begin to see the cancellations stay up in this 50 to 75% range and extend through the summertime? When we break the same cancellation rates and break them down the same graph, so we have the cancellation rate on the y-axis and the check-in dates on the x-axis. There's nothing different here with the sudden onset of cancellations beginning with lockdowns and the rise of COVID cases, but we do see a lot more variance between markets than we do countries, mostly due to whether it's a traditional vacation rental market that's like fly to or drive to or large city. So Italy, as we know, is facing strong lockdowns, and we saw the rise of COVID cases come a few weeks sooner than other countries, and it's kind of well known of their challenges that they're facing. So guest sentiment towards staying there this year are even lower into the summer versus other markets. Versus Barcelona, where we saw this blue line, Rome in Italy, we saw the sudden spike of cancellations come sooner, and we're seeing that higher cancellation rate out into the future, much higher than the other market here in the chart. The second market we broke down this graph is Prague, another city that saw the same sharp increase in bookings there at the beginning of March and kind of have an average rate of cancellations into the summer relative to the other markets we've looked at. The yellow line is Cornwall, which is a drive-to market in the southwest of England. The round of lockdowns came a few weeks later than other countries, which is why we see the spike come a little bit later into March. It's a drive-to market with most guests being domestic travelers. And guests with domestic travel plans in the UK seem to have a better outlook on fulfilling their bookings starting in late May. So even in the UK and in Cornwall, we saw that same spike of cancellations, really just as high as we see in Barcelona. But we do see a much higher confidence in guests' ability to fulfill their bookings as we look farther out into the future. And generally, we're seeing this trend across all markets in Europe as well as the US, where everyone has that same super strong spike in cancellations, but urban markets like Barcelona or Rome are seeing a much higher cancellation rate in the future versus traditional markets like Cornwall or Chamonix. On this next graph, I wanted to share how cancellations are coming in surrounding events. The three markets I'm highlighting here is Barcelona in blue, Cannes in green, and Chamonix in red. Cancellations, at no surprise, are spiking around events, but actually don't always directly correlate with lockdowns and events themselves canceling. The cancellations of the Mobile World Conference in Barcelona, for instance, nearly brought Barcelona to a 50% cancellation rate, And that event was a month before Spain introduced a lockdown. MIPIM, the real estate conference in Cannes, is like the highest source of revenue for property managers there. It was originally canceled from their March date and rescheduled for June, and then canceled entirely. So we saw a large spike of cancellations there. Far out into the future, if we look at the spike here on the Chamonix line, which is in red, kind of got this arrow in the wrong spot. But nearly like 50% of guests who booked for the Du Mont Blanc Marathon in Chamonix have already canceled their booking. But the race itself hasn't been canceled yet. The lesson here is that like travel restrictions and event cancellations aren't the only thing driving cancellations for these events, right? It's just strengthening the fact that consumer confidence is really low and is causing their own wave of cancellations. This cancellations over time graph is showing what we talked about at the beginning of how that peak could continue to flatten out over time. In general, we're still seeing a smaller percent of cancellations for the summer than the onset of the virus. That being said, looking at the data, we can see this dashed line, which are the cancellation rates taken on March 14th. So any cancellation that happened before March 14th was plotted on these dashed lines, where reservations made after or before April 5th, those values are represented by the solid lines. So the market I've highlighted here is Rome, which is the yellow line. Some parts of Italy were in lockdown starting February 21st. Where Rome was placed on lockdown along with the rest of Italy on March 9th. We can see that the wave of cancellations in Rome has been continuing long after initial lockdowns, where we see on March 14th, the cancellation rate for mid-May was around 20%, but today it's up to about 67%. Right, so those were a ton of cancellations coming in for a few months in advance. And they kept coming in a few weeks after those lockdowns. So based on that, we can expect all the other cancellations to keep flattening up. But hoping in the next few months, we'll begin to see kind of that delta between cancellations taken a few weeks ago versus today. We don't see as many cancellations coming in. For reservations, this is a scaled bar chart showing us the number of reservations coming in per week. So it's a scaled bar chart, meaning this blue line represents the average number of bookings that were coming in per week in all of these markets, right? And to make the data more digestible, we scale it so that each bar is essentially relative to that first line. So for example, in Barcelona, the first week of March had about 60% of the number of bookings come in that were coming in on average in February. So at no surprise, virtually all of these markets sharply started to decrease as we headed into the month of March. Besides London and Cornwall, held on to bookings those first few weeks of March, but even then, we saw a large decrease in bookings coming in those markets where there wasn't a lockdown in place. In the media in the UK at the time, they were saying that they weren't going to lock things down in their country. So again, not just lockdowns slowing reservations or causing cancellations, but also that consumer confidence. So the ADRs on those bookings since the onset of the virus, as you can imagine, are a little bit lower than they were before, sometimes quite dramatically a lot lower. And this line graph is showing the percentage change in ADR of bookings made after March 20th compared to bookings made before March 20th. So, for instance, this yellow line is the US. And if we look at like April 19th, for an example, we're at about negative 40%. And what that means is bookings coming in for a check-in date of April 19th. Any bookings that came in after March 20th with that check-in date, the ADRs are 40% lower than the ADRs that were coming in before. Every dollar counts right now for a lot of property managers. So applying discounts and being competitive is something a lot of us need to do. But also, if this lasts too long, it could lead to lower ADRs for years to come, long after markets recover their demand. So we're suggesting to our clients to, look at the next 30 days, look at the next 60 days, and get competitive with your rates, but try not to lower rates throughout the entire year, and try to keep that market ADR a little bit higher. Another way of looking at how ADRs are changing from a macro level is looking at UK's ADRs and how ADRs for 2020 are compared to 2019. So 2020 is the red line, 2019 is the blue line, and we can see how ADRs weren't too different than 2019 leading up to the onset of the virus. Sometimes a little bit higher, a little bit lower, mostly due to weekend and weekdays being a little bit different this year. But once we start to hit that mid-March time, now we're seeing ADRs start to go a lot lower, and really carrying lower throughout the rest of this year. For booking lead time across the board, it's been reduced dramatically. People may not be canceling as much far out into the future, but they're certainly not booking far out into the future either. So these green lines, or the bars, green bars, were the booking lead times in all of these markets before the onset of the virus, or March 20th. And the blue lines are the booking lead times post. So virtually they've dropped to 1 or 2 day for a lead time, and that's the average lead time. So you can imagine almost all of those bookings are going to be having a 1 day lead time. This basically means that consumer confidence is low enough that people aren't canceling some current trips out into the future, but not really confident to make new ones. And also due to like regulations changing every day, lockdowns at the country level as well as municipal level, no one knows where they might be able to go. There's also people getting stranded by airports, isolating themselves from family, escaping their isolation at home. These aren't exactly planned trips, and explain the short booking lead time. While we've seen booking lead time decrease dramatically, we've also seen a large increase in the average length of stay. Essentially, length of stay has doubled for every market. We have European markets here on the left and US markets here on the right. And that's whether it's a traditional vacation rental market or an urban market. We're seeing medical workers renting long stays to stay close to a new hospital they might be assigned to. People are taking their 14-day isolation away from family. Some folks are stranded and aren't able to get home. And also, some property managers are converting short-term rentals to medium-term and long-term to get more cash in the door. It also is representative of the demand that is out there for vacation rentals today. It's not just property managers advertising or wanting people to book longer stays, but this is showing that there's a lot of demand for those longer stays as well, and can tell us a lot about what our revenue management strategy should look like. So our key takeaways from looking at those trends are, dynamics vary by region. We all saw a massive spike as the COVID-19 cases started to come in, and they started to decrease as we look out into the future. We can't expect that to extend, but that's an important graph to watch to see when markets start to recover. New reservations have been muted for most markets. We're getting down to a bare minimum, basically around 5% of the normal new reservations coming in. ADRs have been decreased and will decrease for the short term. So, focus on, sustaining your business with getting competitive with discounts. But as a market, we should all try to keep ADRs farther out into the future a little bit higher. So when the market does come back, we haven't shot ourselves in the foot and lost revenue for the future. Lead times are essentially non-existent, and length of stay on average has nearly doubled for every market. All right, so part 2 is pricing strategies using beyond pricing. First thing I wanted to share with everyone is that we have implemented an automated COVID-19 discount that's customized for each market. So essentially what our revenue management team has done is seen how large of an impact the COVID-19 has had in all of our markets around the globe. And we've applied a discount on top of our normal pricing strategy based on supply and demand. It does still honor the minimum price. That's why I've used this example here, where we've wanted to go a lot lower with this price, where we're starting with our base price, adding or subtracting due to seasonality, day of week. You can see our COVID-19 discount here, but we're not going below the user's minimum price. So just wanted to share this with everyone in case you didn't see the newsletter that went out, or if you're not a user of Beyond Pricing, we're curious in what we did proactively to help our customers. So pricing and length of stay strategies that you can implement using your Beyond Pricing dashboard. Kind of broke these up in different strategies for the immediate, what should be done today if you haven't already, in the short term, medium term, and also long term. So the first immediate thing we suggest is lowering your minimum price. The minimum price in Beyond Pricing is basically a floor you set that you'd never go below in order to take a booking. Most folks have those minimum prices set based on owner requirements, and just want to make sure that there aren't minimum prices in place now that might be a setting that's out of date, right? It's a minimum price before the era of COVID. I think most owners would be willing to take a minimum price a little bit lower. So just remember that all of our automations, our algorithm, right, it's never going to go below that minimum price. So maybe double check where those minimum prices are set. As we saw, while people are looking for longer stays, we do recommend reducing your minimum night stay requirements, just so that when folks are on the OTAs and looking around for a place to stay, you are showing up and getting in front of as many people as possible. Where the average length of stay is long, the demand in general is really, really low. So we want to make that listing as viewable and show up in as many searches as possible, and also reduce any lead time requirements. I know this is really tough operationally, but in seeing that the average lead booking time in many markets is a single day, we don't want any requirements saying that no one can book for the same day or the next day if you have the ability to do that. Kind of in the short term, what we suggest is doing a percentage manual override. So this is more of an aggressive tactic, right? Depending on your strategy and in your business, you may or may not want to implement this. But in Beyond Pricing, you are able to apply, a 10% discount or a 20% discount over a given time frame. So you can apply this across all of your listings in about a few minutes. And if you have any questions on how to implement that change or access the bulk edit tool, shoot us an email after the call and we'll send over how to do it. More in the medium term would be increasing your last minute discounts. So these are automated discounts based on the booking window. So where we're slowly decreasing the price as the date approaches. So just increasing those, so you might start discounting a little bit farther out to help you better understand, like, if people are making bookings, and if you start to pick up bookings a little farther out, if you're starting to discount. And the long-term strategy is going to be lowering your base price. To review, base price it's basically the starting point of all of our price fluctuations. So in areas of high demand, we go above the base price. Areas of low demand, we go below it. And it's not an immediate or short-term solution because, again, we don't want to bring down market ADRs later in the year. The rest of these strategies mainly focus on the next 30, 60, even 90 days. But as we start to pull out of this, if you are in a fly-to market with typically large lead times or long lead times, and you don't see those bookings coming in, then it's going to be time to start lowering your base price. Part 3, revenue management in the age of COVID-19. 3 main tasks or ideas that we wanted to share of how to put yourself in best position to recover. So the first is stay informed, analyze and track, and don't give up on value. So staying informed, you may feel to be at a standstill. Over the past few weeks, it seems like the industry and the world has been coming to a screeching halt, but things are changing. Consumer confidence is changing in different markets around international travel, domestic travel. There's lockdowns happening at the municipal level, the state level in the US, and the country level across the globe. You also need to stay informed about your guest lockdown. Where do your guests come from, and what are the lockdowns and restrictions in their area? Event cancellations. So as we saw looking at the event graph, we saw people making cancellations on their bookings because events were not even canceled, but they just had low consumer confidence to that they'd be able to attend that event. And we're also still seeing event cancellations coming in, right? We just saw the cancellation rate in Tokyo start to spike and throughout Japan because of the Olympics being postponed. So I'm sure everywhere you look, there's news and information about the coronavirus, and trying to stay informed on it. But we just dedicate or suggest dedicating 1 hour a day for professional research, so that if you are talking to owners and guests, you truly understand what they're going through, the way they might perceive the situation, and help you with your overall revenue management strategy. The second is analyze and track. So as the market recovers, it's going to come slowly, and supply and demand will be a lot different. A lot of folks are curious, will there be pent-up demand where people have been in their homes or in their cities for so long that right when the restrictions come out, will there be kind of like a massive rush back to vacation rentals? Like, what's going to happen to supply? It's no secret that through this really challenging time that there are property managers that will be going out of business. There'll be people who are taking their homes off of the market. And just as we saw in 2008, in that recession, that people started to put their homes back on the market. So what happens to supply, and being able to analyze and track that will be really important to your success once we do start the recovery process. And when will international travel be back? So, if your rates aren't tied to supply and demand, now is definitely the time to do it, because it's going to look so much different in the future in that new world as it has in the past. Your high and low performing properties today versus your high and low properties in the future might be a little bit different. So in general, what we're saying is, the future is going to look a lot more different than the past. Your historical data may not be as valuable, So all we can is look into the future and see how the current situation changes and look for opportunities. And every BookingSync user on the call today, if they're a user of Beyond Pricing, you have access to our Insights dashboard. If you're not a user of Beyond Pricing, you can connect your BookingSync account to us for free and use that Insights dashboard where you can see things like your cancellations rate. That same graph we looked at today, the percent of cancellations on the y-axis and the check-in date on the x-axis. That same graph we're looking at cancellations, you can see that for your portfolio, as well as the number of reservations by booking date. So there's no cost, there's no contract, so you do have that ability to get access to that Insights tool through our integration with BookingSync. And the final piece is don't give up on value. Everyone is taking their rates right now, and it's totally understandable, and we need to do that to stay competitive. But as you think about the next 6 months, your guests will probably look a lot different than they did last year. Maybe there won't be as much international travel, and you'll have more domestic guests. And you may need to think rethink guest segmentation to include staycations, healthcare workers, isolation bookings, and really thinking about how your homes and your company can provide value to them. And staying in the know really allows you to better understand what value you provide to the people who are traveling or will be the first to travel in the new age of travel. Finishing up, as at Beyond Pricing, we've heard a lot of questions about our current customers, about billing, right? Everyone's reviewing their costs. And just wanted to share that, just to remind everybody, Beyond Pricing, we do charge a percentage of booking revenue and credit back cancellations if we're pricing the bookings. So current users who are using our product who don't have any bookings coming into their market, they're not paying any bills and essentially getting credits added on top. Non-users of our software, they can use our price recommendations. So we provide weekly calls and monthly calls to customers to help you understand, typically how to best price your properties. And right now we're using that time to better understand their market and how things are developing. So if you're not a user of Beyond Pricing, given our billing process, it's a pretty cost-effective way to get like another perspective on the market, another source of data for yourself. And we just want to be the best resource for everyone possible. All right. Well, that's all I had prepared for today. Audrey, did you want to unmute everyone for questions, or should we switch to the questions on chat?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, Jake, for this very insightful presentation. I see there is already one question in the chat from Ashley. Very interesting question, actually. Maybe if you want to answer that one, and then I will unmute the microphones of the participants so that we can have a short Q&A session. That would be awesome. Can you see the question? Or it's actually about, so Ashley is asking if you think that the decisions taken by the channels, she's mentioning about Airbnb, to allow the free cancellations actually like pushed the people to cancel and increased that spike that you were describing on the charts?
Yep. So I read the question in chat, and I think, I think you're referring to where Airbnb was essentially giving guests all of their money back without any penalty, and we're curious if we thought that was causing the spike. I think bookings and cancellations, the trend probably would have looked very similar, regardless of Airbnb's policy, because we're seeing that same spike. If we look back at cancellations, we're seeing that same spike even in markets like Prague, for instance, where, or that's the country one. So we see the same peak of cancellations in Prague as it reaches out into the summertime. And like the dominant OTA in Prague, for example, is Booking.com. So we're seeing the same spike in all markets, regardless of the cancellations policy. But certainly, I think guests who are like on the edge of canceling their booking and know that they can get a free refund, I think it definitely pushes them over the edge to decide and cancel. But we are seeing the same level and same trends of cancellations in markets where Airbnb isn't the dominant OTA.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. So I will unmute the microphones of the participants. So if anyone has questions, please go ahead. No questions? All right, looks like your presentation was detailed enough, Jake. I have maybe one question. Is there a page on the on the Beyond Pricing website, sorry, where property managers can follow some news or some updates on your site from the impacts of the COVID-19?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to beyondpricing.com, there will be a bar chart or a button here at the top for coronavirus resources. And that will bring you to a place where you can see all of our blog posts related to coronavirus and also a daily updated kind of global graph that's showing the cancellation rates, the reservations and bookings, where you can drill down by different countries and markets. So we're still building out the graph, but you are able to view different countries and how cancellations and bookings are being affected there. And you can also find our blog posts here as well.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. Great, Jake. Then if there is no more questions, maybe we can finish the webinar. So for everyone who joined, as mentioned at the beginning, Ben from the Beyond Pricing team was also participating to this webinar. We decided not to do it in French, but if you have any questions that you would like to discuss in French, feel free to get in touch with him. And if you also have any questions, further questions for Jake, both of them will remain at your disposal. Maybe just write your email, guys, in the chat so that everyone can have it. If you would like to check, Jake, that I'm not doing any mistake.
Yep, Jake at Beyond Pricing. I think Ben's email is ben.delani.
It's different. All right, thanks, Ben.
He just shared it there. Yeah, so if you have any questions or want to take a look at your data versus the markets and try to get a grip on the situation, feel free to reach out. We want to be the best resource we can for everyone.
Cool. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jake, for your time today and for preparing this presentation for us. I wish everyone a nice afternoon or a nice day for the ones on the other side of the ocean. And yeah, all the best to everyone. Take care, guys, and talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. Ciao.
Bye, Jake. Thanks a lot.